that the sold cows taste. Oh, we're live. I would never eat a sold cow, and I certainly would never say that it tastes better than the unsold cows. Listen,
So
welcome
How
to
would
in
you
the
know,
Super.
Ben?
I
You
would
wouldn't
in
know
the
know
that.
by taste.
in
Uh,
the long running role playing game that John ran years ago, we used to have to sacrifice cows to uh pay to the gods who were doing things with. And one of the players found out that once they'd taken the thumb and stabbed the cow so the spirit went out, was eaten by the god, that the meat left behind had, because it had no soul, couldn't make you fat. So they sold the meat to McDonald's to have a burger
That's very
that was
funny.
extra lean.
We were
Amazing.
we were actually talking about the restaurant at the end of the universe. This is where
Ah,
that
yes,
conversation
yes,
started. I
Yeah.
said
yes.
I had mentioned I thought it was an extremely clever bit because he's exposing a philosophical hole in moderns. I said like I could answer it, and that's when I said because we would know like if you're a sapient being, like obviously you can't like kill them. Ben said
Yeah.
I don't think that means that you're necessarily an ensouled being, and I'm like really, and that's when you
Ah,
so
ah, very good, very
I
good.
was
there
just
Yeah.
you
going to
go.
leave the joke hanging, like they had come on us in an inopportune time. But you people can do as you please.
We're
Uh,
ready to go. We're ready to continue.
so, welcome to the Sunday Superversive live stream. We are not actually going to talk about how ensouled a creature has to be before you can taste it. We are, in fact, talking about unsouled beings, creatures living among us called booktubers. Uh, Recently, either through parody or direct action of themselves, I do not interact with BookTube. We are probably the best developed book live stream in the world, but in fact, we do not interact with our peers, and there's a good reason for it. And
We
that
don't like
reason,
them.
we don't like them. They would taste terrible if I were to eat them because of their
And we
lack
don't
of
like to
soul.
eat insult beings. You know, it's
Exactly.
not. It's tacky.
I mean, I do it alone with a thing over my head to hide it from God, like French eating those birds. But uh, the fact is that they have revealed that the reason why booktubers read so many books is because they just skip sections. Like the big
Wow.
one, of course, being skipping descriptions to get back to the dialogue, which, if you're reading some Harlequin romance, is probably the best part
I
of
must
the
admit,
story.
I have, as a fan of romances, skipped the sex scenes to get back to where they argue.
Absolutely.
Honestly, a lot of sex scenes are kind of dull. So, I mean, I you know, understand that, but I think that may not be what they're talking about. So,
No, no. They are talking about things like Moby Dick, Steinbeck, uh, great American novels, great European novels. And sure, if you're reading, like in a more serious way, certain novels like from Flaubert, the dialogue is actually very witty, very capturing. Character oozes from every line. But quite frankly, I've read things like Bellamy. The descriptions are part of it. The
right.
idea
Yes.
of France is as important as it. We are castigating them, and we are bringing on the wonderful, the eloquent, the amazing El Jagi Lamplighter, right? Who
Hello.
has hello, welcome. Who has written a Substack called The Art and Craft of Writing, which you can find different things there behind different subscriptions, which are, of course, well worth it. We have paid in ourselves. Uh,
So,
this this
go
is
ahead.
not an this is not an advertisement. We literally have read it and used it.
Hmm.
So maybe it is an advertisement. I'm sorry.
Well, I appreciate it. It's funny that you brought this up because I thought the reason you'd brought it up was that I had put up something this week about formatting dialogue. And this is a different subject, but I'll just speak on it very briefly. I've been puzzled that everybody I've edited, not every single person, but let's say a majority of people I've edited in the last 5 years format their dialogue incorrectly. And I not only kind of thought it was obvious, I also began to notice that I've never seen a writing course talk about it. And by format it incorrectly, I mean, they do things like, he ran down the road. He said, I'll be there soon. He opened the door and came into the room. Well, notice that if that's one paragraph, the dialogue is in the middle of the descriptions. Now, the people looking to read dialogue, one of the reasons they're looking to read dialogue is that it's easier to read. And while I definitely don't think they should be reading only the dialogue, if you take your dialogue and stick whole sentences, not just like 2 words, but whole sentences of dialogue in between your prose, you're ruining the readability of the dialogue. One of the quotes has to be on the outside of the paragraph. And the other thing they do is like 2 people speaking in the same paragraph, and it's just such an odd thing that I guess they just read books, but they haven't noticed that that's not how dialogue is formatted. So I had put this up this week. So when you asked about dialogue, I thought you were talking about formatting dialogue, but no, you're talking about reading dialogue, which is a totally different subject. So
I of course format my writing to make people suffer, which is quite frankly the only way to live. After 5 minutes hearing about, not even directly experiencing, but simply hearing about how booktubers live. No, I promise you, it was one of those what is it? Fait accomplis, where I happened to see these people discussing it on Twitter. Then I saw one of your arts and crafts emails, and I thought,
yeah,
I've got
it
2 brain
happens to
cells
be-
to run together.
Yep, it's right on topic. So, I mean, I do think that it's nice to have dialogue in stories, and it's nice to make your dialogue easy to read. But I also notice as a writer, if I write too much dialogue and I don't stop to give a little bit of description to it becomes a little existential. It stops. I often think our job as a writer is, imagine the person is in virtual reality. You put on your virtual reality suit, you put on your goggles and your earphones or whatever you have, and now the virtual reality is going to try to trick the person into thinking they're in a different place than where they're sitting in a chair. So they're going to hear the water dripping. They're going to smell the earth. They're going to hear, feel the wind or whatever. Our job as writers is to do that with words. We have to provide the description and the sense impressions, even if just a little bit, to make the reader feel like they're in the scene instead of in their chair, So if all you're doing is writing I don't know, let's say it's a romantasy with what do they call the shadow daddy, evil shadow daddy, who's, fencing, words with a girl, I guess you could just be reading the dialogue. But if you want any other kind of reading experience, you have to read the description, otherwise you're not being, particularly for fantasy, science fiction, and historical. If it's a modern story, you can have a modern story with very little description because the author assumes that the reader knows what's going on. So they might have a thriller or a romance where they go into the hotel and they don't bother. They assume a modern person knows what a hotel looks like. But if the whole point of your reading is that you want to immerse yourself in this other world, the past, a fantasy land, another planet, you can't do that unless you read the descriptions.
Yeah, I think there's also an assumption with like modern YA. Like in reality, there isn't anything to really hook onto for it. Like if I tied one of these degenerates down in a chair and made them explain the difference between mortal engines and I can't remember it, but I couldn't actually, right. like they couldn't really. At best, they could do is say one is on moving cities. Okay, and they're steampunk. Oh, okay, like so the one is moving cities. All right, we have
And
one
the other one is
difference.
vampires, or
The
something
other
like
one is
that.
vampires. Yeah. Okay, so
And
we
they're all, not exactly sure about Mortal Engines, but I think it might also fall in this category. If not, I apologize to it. A lot of them are Harry Potter fanfic that's been
Mhm.
reimaged. Now, I mean, you could say that my books, which were started out as a Harry Potter role-playing game set 25 years after the books, counted also as Harry Potter fanfic. But by the time there was very little Harry Potter in the original one. There was actually more Amber. And by the time I rewrote the whole background, it doesn't really have that much in common. So, but still, I mean, I can't. I have nothing against someone writing fanfic and then redoing it. The question is, what was the purpose of what they were writing? Were they trying to write something to bring alive, the glory of God in a new outfit of literature, which is what I think we're all supposed to be trying to do?
Yeah.
Or were they just trying to do, I want my favorite character to be the one who does, gets the guy or something like that.
You wrote a very great article on this, which we're discussing. There's also, I don't know, do you know the channel? I think it's called Second Story.
I do. Yes, I've
Yes,
listened
she
to
read a
quite a few of the things.
brilliant. First off, probably, honestly, I'm not even going to say probably. I won't even qualify it. The best YouTube channel on writing that I've seen by far. Nothing even comes
She's
close.
excellent. She's superb.
Superb. She had a great video on fanfic where she goes into the real
Yeah.
problem with it, and I think she would affirm your distinction. She wasn't really trying to make your distinctions. She was talking about fan fiction as a whole. But the problem is, she is right about the vast majority of it, right? You
Yeah,
are
well,
talking, you're
she's
making a distinction that is very fair and correct. But when you actually look at it percentage wise, she's probably at like 99% versus the 1%. Yeah.
well, she is talking about the same subject as my fanfic article that I've published more than once about the difference between writing in someone else's background and wish fulfillment fiction. And I personally think that writing in someone else's background, when I was younger, we didn't necessarily call that fanfic. If you wrote a good, solid story, but you just happen to put it in someone else's background, obviously couldn't publish it if it was a copyrighted background. But if it isn't, nobody tried to claim that you had fanfic if you were just writing a story that happened to be about something from the Odyssey or something. Let's say nowadays they use the word fanfic both to mean a solid story in someone else's background and to mean wish fulfillment stories. And wish fulfillment stories, the problem is they're almost the opposite of a real story. So a solid story is a story in which your character has limits and flaws, and they do what they're going to do for a specific reason. And they succeed sometimes and they fail sometimes. And the nature of the characters, it feeds into how they behave. In fanfic, the very first thing people usually do is what if. Well, if you're going to what if, you're often really what you're doing is you're damaging something about a character. Like there's a reason why this character did do this and you're deciding he didn't do it. Or there's a reason why he picked this girl and you're trying to make him pick another girl. And that is actually often, not always. I mean, there are cases where it's perfectly legitimate to look at an alternate what if. But in many of these cases, they're damaging their ability to hear the muse properly by trying to get a character to act out of character. And then they also go in and they put in their insert character, and they have their insert character succeed at things without any effort, or be tortured terribly but not affected by it. Those are the two different sides of insert fan fiction. And so what you're getting is someone who's actually training to write a story that's not a good story. So instead of training themselves, I mean, some people write fanfic and they go on to write great fiction, and there's nothing wrong with it. They're learning how to write the character they love, and then they write their own character. That's not what I'm talking about. That's legitimately attempting. Well, that's what I call the type of fanfic that is further adventures of. If you're trying to write, if you love Harry Potter and you want to write further adventures of Harry Potter, and you're trying to get the characters to act correctly, you're not damaging your understanding of stories. But if you're going in and saying, I'm going to put my character in, and then I'm going to have Harry Potter fall in love with my character, and my character is going to be the one who defeats Voldemort, at that point, you're not doing something that's working towards understanding how drama works. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do agree with that. I think so. One of the first things I wrote when I was younger, I finished the video game BioShock Infinite, which is okay game, but not like the world's greatest. And it had a story that was trying to describe the BioShock series. It was a pretty pretentious series is how I would really describe it in terms of its story. It kind of bought into its own hype a lot. It did have some legitimately great moments, but in the end, it was like a pretty on the nose and silly video game. Like, oh, the first game, the villain was named Andrew Ryan, and he was an objectivist. Do you get it? It's almost Ayn Rand. This is art. Right? Like, that's the sort of thing. And then it got like a 96% because the bar for video game writing is very low.
It's I believe that's true. At least it was true. It may be getting better, but yeah, I understand exactly what you mean.
It's getting worse.
Oh,
it's
no.
getting worse, not better. But that's another story. The video, we've actually done shows on this, so I'm not going to get into it now. But video games need to be written in an entirely different way than like novels and books. Like what makes a good novel, what makes a good book, and what makes a good video game story are very different things for a variety of reasons. But I won't get into it now. Just going into BioShock Infinite, it was a game that like took itself really seriously, right? And then the ending was just horrendous, right? Like the whole story was about the main character goes to this floating city in the sky, and he is kind of tasked with like protecting this girl who was imprisoned by some sort of monster. And then at the end of the story, you learn that the villain of the game is really like an alternate version of you who turned evil and racist. Everybody's racist in this world who's, because he was obsessed with this. And the game ends with, and then you learn that the girl who you're like bring around is really your daughter who was lost when you were younger. Okay, time travel shenanigans, whatever, right? So you reach the end of the game, and the reveal at the very end of the game is that all the alternate versions of her come together and murder you. And
it sounds like a really bad game.
Yeah, it ends with you waking up. There's like a little post-credit scene. It doesn't make a lick of sense, by the way. Like, I understand that time travel inherently doesn't make sense, and if you dig into
but this makes less sense.
Yeah, if you dig into it enough, eventually you'll break every time travel story. But this is, I think, just a little bit too obvious. It didn't hide the trick very well. Eldritch Fan says racist or communist, but you repeat yourself. Anyway, so going into there's a little post-credit scene where you wake up and you run into the room where your daughter is supposedly waiting, and then it cuts out and you don't see if like the timeline reset and she's there or not. It just ends, right? it doesn't make a lick of sense. Why she just murdered you. The whole point was that like how does none of it, like they don't even try to explain it. They're just like, and that's the ending. So I finished the game. It was like nihilistic garbage. I was like incensed. I wrote an utterly terrible fanfic and posted it up. And over the years, it's gotten like 4 comments. One of which was like, that was okay. And another was someone going, dude, this is terrible. And I responded to him and I'm like, yeah, man, I know. I'm like, it's bad, but however, I still claim that I fulfilled my goal of writing a better ending than the actual game.
You probably did. Yep. And there's nothing wrong with
I had a real ending where you know, they escaped or something, whatever I wrote. I just wrote in a fit of anger. I was so mad at how bad the ending was.
That seems to me like a perfectly good use of fanfic, and as you say, it was early on, and it's not like that's all you did, you know. And I think, you know, and I had an advantage when I was young that a lot of other people who fall into fanfic don't have, which is my dad sold movies. He was a movie distributor to TV, so our whole livelihood depended on understanding what was copyrighted and what was not copyrighted. So right from the start, it never occurred to me as a kid to write fanfic because I knew it was copyrighted and I couldn't use it, you know? So I did my, you know, some of my stuff was probably serial number filings off of like Pern or, you know, something else I really loved. But right from the beginning, I had to do the filing, you know, which I think is a good thing for people to learn to do. And nowadays they, you know, there's so much encouragement there's so much readership of fanfic. And I just discovered, this is not what I was originally going to say, but I'll say it quickly. I just discovered that there's another trap involved in all this that I had not even foreseen. And that is, at least the Harry Potter fanfic, you can't sell it. You can't sell it unless you change the names. But that is not true for Pride and Prejudice fanfic. There is a highly paying market for it on Amazon because, of course, it's not copyrighted. So there's an entire groups of people who just read alternate Pride and Prejudice where Lizzie's actually a princess or Darcy has a mistress or something. And I'm looking at this going, why in the world are you guys just not reading other Regency novels that have nothing to do with the characters you say you love, but you're actually slaughtering here, you know? Oh, sorry. It's shocking to me, shocking. But back on the previous topic, I think one of the things Hilary Lane, the second story, was emphasizing was that the fanfic writing is damaging all writing because these people write fanfics. They write the wish fulfillment style fanfics. They get attention from other people who are interested in that type of wish fulfillment. And they go on and get jobs writing for like Marvel or something, you know, and that finally began to explain why the stories that I've been hearing about the comics for the last 10 years have been so bad. And I, you know, really, during the period when the movies were really big, I had a friend who worked in a comic store and she was really sad because parents would come in and they're like, my kid loves Captain America or whoever it was, you know, and the comics that they had to sell were terrible. They were super woke. You know, the writing was really bad. It would be things like a group of female comic heroes, superheroes sitting around doing their laundry. Well, you can see how that would come out of people who spend all their writing just writing a kind of self-absorbed wish fulfillment. But, you know, before I heard what she had to say on the topic, I couldn't figure out why it was happening. But then I eventually realized people were getting a lot of attention as fanfic writers and then getting hired to do real, quote unquote, real stuff.
Yeah, I think that there's a distinction as well between, and we're kind of dancing around this, fan fiction and pastiche, right? Like,
Yeah. Mhm.
um, and when we spoke with John, he mentioned this as well, that he didn't use those terminology, but basically he's like, he's like, when I wrote like Awakened Nightland, like, and you know, his sequel to World of Nulla, Nulla Continuum or whatever it was, like,
Yeah.
he's like, I wasn't writing fan fiction, right?
No, he was not. That's what I call Further Adventures of, or just writing something else in the same background. It's and that's why I say it's not the same. And it's why I think it's ridiculous that someone was telling me Shakespeare wrote fanfic. I'm like, no, under no definition was what Shakespeare did fanfic, even if you knew that he was rewriting older stories. Okay, writing like, you know, when Hollywood does, you know, a new version of Highlander or whatever, a remake, it's not fanfic. I mean, it might be bad or it might be good, but it's not by definition. Just rewriting someone else's story doesn't make it fanfic. Now, if you wanted to argue that the Aeneid was fanfic of the Iliad and the Odyssey, we might be able to have a conversation about that.
Uh,
I was not the hugest fan of the Aeneid, but even there, I think he qualifies well above the fanfic level. So,
yeah, it's people will also use kind of try and cope with these sorts of distinctions as well. They'll try and feel better about themselves. Like I've
right,
seen people describe so many times. Originally, I took it as a joke and I laughed at it because as a joke, it is funny. But then people were actually taking it like more seriously. Uh,
yeah,
and it's that Dante, like they'll call Dante self-insert fanfic. Like
right, which is just ridiculous
right.
because Dante is a travel log. People write stories with themselves in them that are perfectly legitimate stories all the time. He's not writing fanfic. He's writing a travel log where he's telling you about what he did as if he himself was there seeing it, you know?
Like
And to
here's the
take
thing.
something like Dante that's so well done, and
Mhm.
as you say, try to, you know, pat yourself on the back by saying that's what they're doing. It's just ridiculous. Sorry.
Yeah, it's here's the thing. When I first heard it, they were like saying it as a joke, and as a joke, I was able to laugh at it because I'm like, there are
Yeah,
some fun points to make. It's like, oh, Dante wrote a story where he goes on a journey with his bestie, who's the best, and on the journey, he learns that he's also one of the greatest poets ever, and he's totally the best. And I laughed because I'm like, that's kind of amusing as a like a joke. It's not obviously a
right,
fair description, really, but
right,
like I didn't think people were taking it seriously. I'm like, no, that's amusing. I get the idea. Like there
right,
is
right.
something to be
As a
funny.
joke, it's funny. But if
Yeah.
they're trying to be
But then
serious
people
about it, it's
started saying
ridiculous.
this over and over again. You could tell they were clearly trying to feel better about the fact that they were
Right.
fan fiction, self-insert fic writers. And I'm like, wait, no, you don't really think this, do you? Like the Divine Comedy is just basically it's one of the things just like, okay, tell you what, if your self-insert fan fiction is as good as the Divine Comedy, then I will
Right.
concede the point. But
Right.
it's
And the
not.
thing is, that just because you put yourself in a story doesn't mean that it's self-insert fanfic. If I was going to write a story about, I have online somewhere something called the China Post, which where I was once spent 2 weeks in China, and at night, I never, you know, I hadn't entirely turned my schedule around, so everyone would go to sleep, and I would write posts about what I did during the day. Okay, well, let's say I turn that into fiction, because I still have them available. Sometimes people read them and really like them. They're just funny little, you know, how life was different in China, and the trouble the day I got lost and things like that. If I turn that into a story, and it was a story about me and my experiences getting lost and trying to find the bathroom in China or whatever it was, that everything was different, you know, that's not fanfic, because unless I mean, it's not wish fulfillment. Well, I'm describing, you know, getting lost and discovering new things and having to overcome problems and not being able, I mean, it's not wish fulfillment if it's not wish fulfillment. It's not wish fulfillment just because I'm in it. If you know what I mean.
I have an
I treat
amazing
myself as a regular character and I have myself deal with the ups and downs of life, then it's no different than if I'm writing about somebody else. It's just a story. It's only self-insert fanfic, wish fic, if you're like everything's going your way. And Dante certainly didn't have everything go his way, if you understand what I mean.
Right. I have an amazing book called How Not to Write a Novel. The best writing book ever written. I highly recommend it.
Oh, who's the author?
I don't know. Let me
I mean, it's a great title.
How Not to Write a Novel. It's hilarious. 200 classic mistakes and how to avoid them. Howard Middlemark and Sandra Newman are the
Cool,
authors.
cool. I haven't heard of that one, but it sounds interesting.
Anthony,
You
are
guys-
you back?
Yes,
Did you
I
lose him?
was lost for a moment and it blinked out of existence like
I'm glad it wasn't just me. I thought,
Thanos.
oh no, I lost him. I had moved my hand. I'm like, I shook him off the phone somehow.
He's having some sort of internet problems, maybe.
Well, hopefully he'll be back.
Yep.
In the meantime, what are your thoughts, Ben?
Right. So it's no secret I've written for Fantastic Schools. The characters I've set by permission in the Roanoke universe. The key for what I'm doing to set it above is that many of the characters within it's no secret that many of the characters in Roanoke are of another world, sort of other genres. Luke Skywalker's running around somewhere. You have Superman, all these different characters. I'm not saying
Right.
who they are.
Yeah.
So one of the things I noticed is that there are actually very few just straight up horror characters roaming around.
Yeah, there are a few, but not necessarily showcasing them, though one of them comes on stage in a later book. But yes,
Yep.
You're right about that.
Yep. And so it's very amusing to me to have characters who come from Pinkerton's Ghosts, who are very hardcore horror characters. Horror. Got to be careful with that. Who are running around Roanoke trying to live their lives, deal with villains who, in Pinkerton's Ghost universe, would know how to, shall we say, escape the doom of a world. And sort of balance it out. So what, as well as getting stuck in sort of the narrative being repeated because the evil characters who escaped are just going to continue to be evil.
Yeah. In the background, I think it came out in book 6, so I think I can say the Raven put Grace into the villains when he brought them. But some people accepted it and reformed, and some of them didn't. So there are some pretty bad villains in a bug there that that just didn't accept the grace that was offered and went back to being their old selves.
Yep.
And I would not think of what you are doing as fanfic. I like to describe people writing in someone else's background a little bit like Gone with the Wind and Red Badge of Courage. They both take place in the Civil War, but they're not like each other. You know what I mean?
No.
So, what you're writing is the mood is different, but it's your own characters and you're writing the kind of story you would write. It just happens to be in the setting,
Yeah.
So to me, that doesn't count as fanfic. It's only fanfic if a person doesn't do it well, if you know what I mean.
Right.
If you go into wish fic instead of trying to write a legitimate story.
Like in the story I'm trying to write for Fantastic School Mothers, which you should all pick up when it comes out. The Jack Morrow in an off-screen moment that I've written down in another story is severely injured, and he's to survive the fall of their world, they had to do some pretty crazy and borderline to really evil stuff to get out. it's, not that they were like villains, to be clear, and it was just they had no idea what was going on until the Raven sort of told them about it. But it's, I don't want to put it, like he can't enjoy the free and easy magical healing that is prevalent in the Roanoke universe. People can get healed as long as they don't die. Is whatever our lovely guest thinks of the rule. It seems to me, especially as a horror writer, that you can do a lot with that.
Oh yeah, yeah, you can. Now I should say there are types of injuries they can't heal. There's a girl in book 7, which I haven't written yet. There's a girl in a wheelchair. In fact, she appears in a short story. See you down the road. But yes, it's true. You can. I mean, I am reminded of the line from the second Aladdin movie where Jafar says, "You would be surprised what you can live through."
And Jack's a pretty tough cookie with a high pain tolerance, as befits any horror character. But it leads to trouble within the family. The 6 kids had a very neglectful mother at the best of times. And part of the deal of them going to Roanoke was that she willingly gives herself up for psychiatric counseling, healing, all this stuff, helping them find Jeremiah Pike, who's Jack's father and one of the villains who received grace and rejected it. So she eventually discovers this. And so the horror is, the devouring mother archetype, which is something that you had in book 3 in a different way. With Juma O'Malley.
Yeah. His mother is yeah.
Yep. But it's like, so what happens? Well, they can't really go home, so they're stuck. Both dependent on the grace of people who are, at best, very worried about them. Because they know that there are more dead bodies lying around than what their mother could possibly do. That these are intrinsically, people who have been desperate and are not, well-mannered, all, in the same way. Like, there's a different characterization within the world, following very carefully the rules of the world.
Yeah, I should say on the horror front, I as a writer don't play up the horror, but we are talking about a world where the number hasn't come up yet, but 15,047 people came here because someone was murdered. And a lot of the times it was one person murdered per person who came.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time the person was murdered by someone they love being possessed by an evil force. So there's a lot of potential for horror. There's a lot of potential for horror in the background, even though that's not what I tend to emphasize.
Yeah, and there's different factions and everything working for it, but they're all serving the same master in the end. So it's while I'm crafting this, I'm going back over the stories. How is Master Warder Nighthawk portrayed? How are these characters working together? Let's say that Dean Moth is worried that the point of view character Victoria Langry is going to go crazy. She can't actually be a mother. She's still the principal of a school with like 15,000 princes in it. And the associated number of princesses. That's 24/7 drama. But it's like, okay, I understand that these kids are suffering, and it's set during some events that haven't been described in the book that I'm not going to spoil. So, like, there's all this pressure on them, and there's 6 students. Well, 3 students are actively drowning. So it's like in a fan fiction, everything would just be kind of solved, boop, ba-doop, ba-doop, ba-doo. Characters may go through some suffering, but then, it's going to be okay in the end. It's going to be a mother's touch that heals Jack. when in actuality, the Fantastic Schools Familiar story is set after this, and if you've read it, which you should, Jack Morrow is in a very terrible state.
Yeah.
Barely functioning as a student. He's more of a hospice patient, so it's the characters are working within the story, rigidly associating with the rules. And even though they might bump up against each other, if I ever like condense them into a novel, they'll interact with like the famous fun characters, like the Grand Inquisitor, who isn't happy with one of the characters,
Yeah.
who isn't very happy at all in a story that I've written in the side because I have a continuity of what the characters are doing. And Jack made a moral choice, but in a way that if it were publicly known, he'd be very much more of a pariah than he already is. So it's like there's a regression of the characters into, a state that works within the story, but also each character has to follow their rules. If you write a Harry Potter fan fiction, in reality, like you said earlier, writing the story, oh, what are they going to do with Harry Potter's cool ass grandkids who are having adventures,
Right.
versus
Well, look at the difference between, like what you said about, trying to notice how Master Water Nighthawk works. Look at the difference between, I love Harry Potter and I'm going to sit down and write something, and I want to write about, let's say, something from what was Luna's point of view when this had happened, that she wasn't on stage from the book, or what happens to Harry Potter's grandson, or something like that. I'm trying to keep the universe that was established by the author as it is, but I'm adding to it.
Yeah.
To me, that's really different because what you're trying to do there is you're trying to ask the same muse who's inspiring Harry Potter to inspire you. It's not that different than, okay, this guy wrote Batman, and now I'm going to write, Batman. If you were a professional, like I'm going to write Batman, or I'm going to write this TV character, Star Trek, or whatever. Well, different people do write those characters, and they're trying to all keep the character the same and tie into the muse that the other guy has. And that's totally different from, I'm going to rewrite the story and change it from the original. Now, I think what Anthony was talking about, where the original story was awful, and you're trying to make sense of it, that's a slightly different thing. Okay. I think a bad story that you're trying to make into a better story is different from a good story that you're, for whatever reason, you're trying to write your own version of. And so I think there's just a big difference between, I want to write a really good Snape and I want him to act like Snape, or I want to write Master Water Nighthawk and I want him to act like Nighthawk. And somebody who comes in and goes, okay, I'm gonna write a romance where Master Water Nighthawk acts like a goofy guy and not like a super serious, super intense guy. If you see the difference of what I mean. In one case, you're trying to understand how to portray a character. You're trying to do it justice. Maybe you're a good writer and you do it. Maybe you're not such a good writer and you don't, but you're trying, and you're trying to improve your writing by getting better at it. And in the other case, you're deliberately trying to not make the character act in character, and so if you're trying to write Jack and those guys and you're bringing them in and now they're kids and they're in a world that's not their normal world, and they're perceiving this world that, is perceived more brightly from Rachel's point of view, but they're perceiving the, a more horrific point, that's a perfectly legit story way. That's like, to a horror story and a adventure story set in the same town,
Yep.
That's very different than it, because the difference of mood, having a character come on saying, this character, here's what this character is like in a darker mood, it can still be the same character, It's
Right.
very different from I'm going to make Snape the romance hero and he's going to have an affair with Hermione or whatever. You know what I mean? At
Yep.
this point, you're not portraying the characters accurately. You're doing something else to them.
There's a yeah. There yeah. It's like if you you know we'll just make the joke, if Mr. Chanson and Nighthawk, Master Warder Nighthawk, in a French Parisian cafe, it's like, no, that doesn't, you're welcome, Fujoshis and weird Japanese girls. Okay. You're welcome for the image. But, it destroys a certain nature of it because there's an element of goodness in like the Roanoke world that is superseded by the Narnian world. If you stuck Jack in the Narnian world and he sort of gets over the talking animals, really there's like one monster in a century, and it's not really like that at all. And he would just kind of like a guard dog who has nothing to do. He just kind of lay there and get fat. Like it's like the you have to even the purpose of the characters has to flow through, because if Snape didn't love Harry's mother, like it would be a completely different character and interaction with Harry Potter.
Right. And one reason when I very first heard about Harry Potter, one of the things that made me like it was that I had read stories about C.S. Lewis, who was sent to a school where the teacher had gone mad. I don't know if you know about his childhood, but he was sent to a school that like his older brother, or maybe even his father, I'm not sure, had been to, but the guy had gotten older and was kind of losing his mind. And I'd read other real stories about people in British boarding schools. And so the way that Snape was unfair to Harry struck me as the exact kind of experience that British boarding schools had that you don't tend to get in America. I'm not saying that nobody can go to a school where the teacher hates them, but it's just that the amount of control that the teacher has over your life in a British boarding school, based on the stories I'd heard from real people, seemed to be quite different than the kind of thing I see normally in American schools. The approach is different. So my first reaction was, wow, this is like a British school, but fantasy, But so she doesn't pull her punches with Snape. He doesn't like Harry, but he still has this decent part of him, that loves Harry's mom and is still going to, try to do the right thing because of that. And of course, she plays it to great effect in book 1, where you think Snape is the villain and he turns out not to be the villain.
Yeah, I know. Ben was not a Harry Potter guy, right? I was a Harry Potter kid growing up.
I couldn't stand to read it.
Yep.
I love it.
I understand it. I grew up with Harry Potter. It was like basically the first real-ish novel I read. I was reading like Hardy Boys. I thought all of the kids' fiction around at the time was fairly bad. People were reading like Captain Underpants, and it weirded me out. Still does. Not a fan of it. I don't, and it turns out that the creator ended up being like a weirdo too, who added gay stuff to the story, but whatever. Not that Rowling is excused from this either. That's another story. Anyway, so I read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I have a vivid memory of reading this. Like when we talk about like books of gold, I'm almost ashamed to say it, because you go on Twitter, it's like, what's your book of gold? Like, it's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, man. I don't know. Like,
it's a good book. It's a good book.
I wish. True, but people go like, "Oh, I have these books that like these are like these unique books that are specific to me." Like, no, if I'm being honest, that's what I have to say, right?
Sure.
And one of the things I do remember is what you're talking about. I was reading like Hardy Boys mysteries at the time. That was like the only thing basically that I was really liked. And my mom like got Harry Potter because it was a big hit, and she was like, "Hey, maybe you'll like this. It's popular now." And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't really read fantasy." And I like devoured the book, right? Finished it. It was the first book I had ever read that I couldn't finish in a single sitting. Like no matter what
Yeah,
it was,
I understand what you're saying.
yeah, already blew my mind. Like I couldn't believe that this was like a thing, you know. Uh and then I finished it, and I remember like when when the ending came, it was revealed like that Quirrell was really the villain and that Snape was
Yeah,
trying to, like this blew young Anthony's mind. Like I read this, I was like, this is the best book I've ever read in my life. Like that's unbelievable. Now, so many things about the Harry Potter phenomenon. It's like you really just don't know till you're there. It's so hard to get across what it was like being in the middle of it to people who are not part of it. And I think it's the same with a lot of things. You see it with like Star Wars too. People who are like,
yeah,
no, you don't understand. Like Star Wars was like the only good movie. Yeah.
yeah,
and
yeah. It was
and I'm like,
the
okay,
uplifting movie among all these.
yeah,
I think that
fair
one
enough.
and was it the Highway Heaven. I can't
Mhm.
remember. There was a movie about the same time that involved like an angel and stuff that was also kind of positive. But
Yeah,
almost everything else that was out was really grim.
exactly. So when we talk about like the impact of stars, then you rewatch it today, and you're like, I mean, I guess it's a good movie, right? Like it's good. I like the first Star Wars movie quite a bit.
I was
It didn't
just
blow.
explaining to someone today that I had worked at a job where we had to play a movie all the time
Mhm.
in the background. It was a bookstore, and Star Wars was one of the few movies I could watch over and over again without getting sick of it because it's actually quite good movie. It's actually quite fairy tale like, But go
I
ahead.
would tend to agree with like the reviewer who said like I'm not a huge fan of it. Like I appreciate it for what it is. Like I appreciate it for capturing like the quality of timelessness and for its storytelling. But like I'm not a huge fan. I think the first movie is good. The second movie's great. The third movie's good. Right? I like it.
That's what
Harry
John thinks
Potter is
too.
the same
I
thing. Where
love the first movie of Star Wars, and I'm not as keen on the more science fictiony second movie.
that's
But
fair.
John's like you. He thinks that the second one is really the where Star Wars really is at its top. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair too, because they're doing kind of very different things as
But yeah,
well.
they're doing slightly different things, and I like the mythic quality of the first movie.
Mhm. So with Harry Potter, like when you go into like the sixth book, I remember this is in retrospect, you read the ending of the sixth book, like and I tell you, it's like you really do not understand the impact of the ending of the sixth book without like being there. I went to a midnight release party, right? Like for the sixth book.
We went. I think I went for books like I took 8-year-old Orville to the midnight release book for party for book 7, but I think I went myself for book 6.
Yeah,
And book 6 was the one that John was in the barber's chair with a thing over his with to keep the hair off, so he couldn't put his fingers into his ears when somebody on MTV revealed the 3 major circuit secrets from the book.
that's funny.
And it was like we had just bought the book. It was like the day it had come out or the day after it had come out. So because of that, when book 7 came out, we went and got it at midnight with Orville. We started reading it, and John and I read the book aloud to each other because that's how we did all the Harry Potter books. Because we started it originally when he happened to pick it up. He thought he'd heard about it, and we had a car trip. So we would read them together. I don't remember how long it took us, but we read the whole thing. You were talking about whether you could read it in one day. We didn't go to sleep until we had finished it. We
That's how
sat,
I would
maybe we
accept
slept
books as
once
well.
in the middle of it, but we stayed up, and I think it was like 5 a.m. We finally finished it of like a day and a half later because we were completely determined we were going to get through it before anybody spoiled anything.
Yeah, I was not spoiled on book 6. So I read it. I tell people like, look, when you reread it now, and if also you're not part of the zeitgeist, you're not following the books live, it's very obvious something weird is happening at the end, right? Like
Yeah.
in retrospect, it's so obvious that the publishers even knew how obvious it was, and very cleverly, by the way, pivoted their marketing strategy. I remember this vividly. Like it became a thing like, is Snape good or evil? Well, the reason
Yeah.
is because he obviously what you saw wasn't right, correct?
Right.
So people,
Right.
okay, all of that, which was, by the way, a genius marketing move. But anyway,
The whole thing was really, yeah, well done.
going into the end of the book, it's like, I cannot tell you, reading it live, I think I almost dropped the book. Like, I was so shocked at what happened. It's like,
Yeah,
you have to understand the way that the twist is set up is not so much like, oh, nothing weird is happening. Is that this is the absolute last thing you would ever expect to happen in
right,
this section
yes.
of the book. For it to happen at all, like any context really doesn't change it, right?
And
Like,
and I spent hours trying to figure it out. Like I mean, once is he evil? What's he really up to? I think he may not be evil, but how could he possibly do? I mean, you know what I mean? I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. One of
so
the fun things about reading the books together was that we normally didn't read them like all at once, so you would have time between reading a few chapters, and I'd have to wait for the next day. So I spent a lot of time, particularly in book 6, thinking about each step of the mysteries, like what's really going on and how is this working, and figuring certain things out, but not other things, Anyway, keep going.
yeah, so when it comes to Harry Potter, and like, in retrospect, years have gone by. I look back at the books, and like, I think that they're overall fairly good, but also very flawed. What's funny is that with the left completely turning on Rowling for nonsense reasons, right? Like,
Yeah.
their reasons.
Well, no. Very good reasons to them. Like she's a heretic.
Yeah.
She was one of their priests.
Oh, no. You're
and-
like, that's not what I mean. I mean nonsense
Oh.
reasons, as in the reasoning is nonsense.
And that we think
Oh,
it's nonsense. Yeah.
But anyway, like, when I look back at Harry Potter now, I could see a lot of holes in the story. And some things are especially, like, even just, I would say, like, quite bad pieces of writing and world building, like things she clearly didn't think through, things I would do. But so many of the criticisms are things that are, like, it drives me nuts to read them because they're so fake, right? Like, they're so forced. It's so obviously not what they thought or what they think. One of the ones to me is like, I'm actually the opposite of many people. I think Rowling is great with names. I actually think that's one of her big strengths, is that she writes extremely fun and memorable names that fit.
I like her names too. Well. And I know that
this weird meme where people are pretending that Rowling is bad at names. And I'm like,
silly.
And I'm like, that's nonsense. It's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, her names are great. It's one thing I find interesting is that there are a number of names. So one of the things going on with certain books, and this definitely is true of Harry Potter and Twilight, but others too, is that they're written for a certain market. And when they become really, really popular, they expand beyond that market, but the certain things about them that are actually just meant for that market don't scale up.
Exactly.
So Rowling was writing for the people who read books like Carbonell and Worswitch, which were British books about magic for children. And you understand, if you've read these books, why she didn't think she was writing a fantasy book. And she didn't write it like a fantasy book. A fantasy book, we expect the magic system to make sense and there to be some kind of continuity between things. But the kind of fantasy of children's story she was copying, they're more lightly written. There's much less of an expectation that you ever find out why the big red and green liquid in these little symbols that are on the apothecary store when you drink it you can talk to animals in one of the Carbonell books. Nobody expects to ever find out why that is or for it to make sense. Mm-hmm. But I noted when I was reading the Carbonell books to Orville, and they were written in the 50s, I think, a lot of the names of characters in those books appear in Harry Potter, like Tonks and Pettigrew, and you know who was used for the witch there. And so you can tell that she probably loved these books when she was young, you know what I mean? And she was trying to write something in that style. And that style does not expect to be looked at the way that the 7 Harry Potter books are analyzed by people, you know? So I don't think she went into it thinking she was writing the kind of structure that we as fantasy authors expect to do.
Well, I think the biggest problem with Harry Potter, I've thought a lot about this, read those books and reread them multiple times, right? I will say for off the bat, I think they mostly hold up. However, I do think that there are serious structural problems with them as well. And the big thing is that the last book and the first book, clearly, when you reread them, especially, like, you could do this as an exercise. Read the first book, skip the middle books, and read the last books. They are clearly do not fit together. They
I see what you mean. Yeah,
they don't make any sense. Like, when you analyze the logic of the first book, by the logic the first book is talking to you with, which is like you're saying, those 50s style kids books, right?
Right.
Roald Dahl,
Yeah.
Everything that happens, that makes perfect sense. Harry goes at the end, why did Dumbledore let us do it? And Harry thinks for a moment, says he might have been willing to test us. I'm 11 years old. That makes perfect sense to me.
Right.
I am 17. I am now being told in the last book, right, that I am in fact expected to take Dumbledore's actions and words with a serious grain of salt. That I now need to relook at everything he did and analyze it and go, is what he did make sense? Now I do that, and I look back at the first book, and I go, none of that makes a lick of sense.
Right.
And
in fact, that's I've seen articles written by Chris Nuttall on this subject, and basically to sum it up, if you try to look at the Harry Potter world with the seriousness of as if it's an adult really looking at it, the childlike wonder of the earlier books doesn't make any sense. You have to be willing to go in and be reading them with that same thing, like you're reading Worst Witch, or you're reading which has been made into several. There's a pretty good TV version of Worst Witch on Netflix, at least it was. It came from BBC, but they've done that one several times. Nobody's really expecting in those types of stories to explain why the adults didn't interfere, or et cetera, et cetera. And then you're right, when you go to when you follow through to her going from Childland to trying to make it much more like a realistic YA 17-year-old story, as you say, the earlier books can't be read in that mood.
It just doesn't work. And the problem is you're expected to treat it as all part of the same history.
Right. And it's almost as if imagine the first several books were animated and then suddenly they went to live action. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you're right. It's somewhere around book, like 5, 6, and 7 are kind of in a different genre almost than the earlier books.
Exactly. And book 7, John's mentioned this, and I actually kind of disagree with him in the opposite way. He says that he thinks that Rowling blinked at the end with the Christ-like sacrifice of Harry, that she was setting it up and then she blinked. And I said, see, that's actually the opposite of my criticism. I thought she was way too on the nose. I read it and I said, that's clearly, I understand exactly what you're doing. You have quoted the Bible in multiple places. Harry literally dies, resurrects, comes back to save his friends.
I think you're both right, and let me explain what I mean by that. For her Christ stuff is subtle enough that when Mark Whipple decided to run his game, he thought there was no Christianity in the books at all. That's why he set up the idea he had for Roanoke, which I borrowed for. I mean, it wasn't Roanoke back then, but which I kept when I turned his game into a book. That they live in a world where, Christianity and God and angels have been hidden from them. He got that from the fact that he hadn't noticed the Bible quote, and he hadn't. But I think what Rowling herself once said, that she had played down Christian elements really, really a lot in her books, tried not to mention them or bring them up because she didn't want to. She felt like everybody was going to figure out ahead of time what she had planned. And where I think that she messed up is, if this was British boarding school in England, where there is going to be a Christ-like event at the end, and there are church stones with Bible quotes on them, why didn't the kids go to church? A real British boarding school would have had church. And I can't help wondering how the whole generation of Harry Potter loving kids might have turned out differently if she had had her characters be Christians. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, that's where I think John is thinking that she blinked. That she could have made a slightly more overtly Christian world and made it clear that her characters were in fact Christians, and she didn't.
That I agree with. And I think too, I mean, I think the seventh book, and John's mentioned it's like, it's not a bad book by any means. There are
Yeah, it's
good
not bad, but it's
but there are weaknesses. And I think one of the big ones is that she shoves the Deathly Hallows into the last book. I actually think like the concept of the Deathly Hallows, the fairy tale itself, is genius. I think it's brilliantly done. I think that the way it is used, why was this mentioned now? Why did you not mention this when Horcruxes were brought up?
yeah, yeah.
This is clearly when this should have come up.
It would have been a lot better if these things had been hinted at or mentioned earlier. It's hard to establish them last minute. So when I was reading the book, Mark and I got into a conversation about what we could tell she's just marking time. She just wants to have the school year over, so she has them live in the woods for a long time. And we started talking about, like what else she could have done. And after that conversation, I never really enjoyed the book as much, because I'm like, look at what she could have done. But what we thought is, imagine if instead of just living in the woods, as long as they're not going to school anyway, the kids had gone to France and Germany and tried to actually go talk to Grindelwald themselves. And you could have put on a little bit of what European wizarding world was like and had them encounter new things. And, after we had that conversation, I was pretty disappointed with book 7, because I felt like there was just a lot of opportunity for putting on stage things that could have expanded her world, and having them just live in a tent in the woods wasn't that,
There's also, there are criticisms of the series that I do think are correct and hold up. One of the big ones is I think that she handles Slytherin House quite badly. I actually disagree with a lot of people. I think a lot of fans do say this too. I think a lot of the fans who want to identify with Slytherin, which is frankly the only house besides Gryffindor that has an identity. A real one, like, Ravenclaw's smart. Okay. But like Slytherin has an identity. So people try and identify. No, it doesn't mean. What was that?
Hufflepuffs are good finders.
Yeah, Hufflepuffs are especially good finders.
When I actually was running a game based in this, because the Marks game was based on a game I ran for my son when he was like 7. I realized that if you're really laying it out, a justice would probably be Hufflepuff. You know what I mean? Like, there were things you can kind of see if you look into it. Hufflepuff has a little bit more qualities than really come across quickly. So the 4 do have some definite personality, but I do think you could have done a lot more with them.
Yeah, and I think, but with Slytherin, you'll sometimes go, they're not the evil house. I'm like, I disagree. I think Rowling is very clear. I think in the books, they're the evil house. I think that you're coping. If you're like reading and going, they're not the evil house.
I think you're correct. And in a kid's book, it's okay to have house where all the evil guys were. And I have that at Roanoke too, except of course the main character's boyfriend lives there too.
Well, somebody mentioned this though. Somebody mentioned this. I saw it like on a post, and ever since I heard it, I immediately thought this is a massive missed opportunity. They said in book 4, Cedric is made the champion, but there's a Slytherin who applies, who's a minor character named Warrington. They said, why wasn't he the champion? That would have been so good. And then if he gets killed, and Harry now has to deal with and now he has to deal with the fact that he was there when a Slytherin died, and all the Slytherins don't trust him already. And then, but also Harry knows that this guy is actually a good guy, like that he was murdered by Voldemort, right?
Yeah.
That could have been but she didn't do that. And Rowling also has this weird thing where clearly something was cut out of the final book, because it comes up in interviews where she'll say, well, Slytherin House went back in the final battle. And then we go, but wait a minute, like you reread the book and it sounds right. And then you go, that's not in there. And I would realize that was probably there and an editor took it out.
I think that I don't understand why they rushed her on the final book. I mean, they had this great phenomena. It's not like people would not have waited another year. It's clearly that she got rushed. The book was too long. It needed to be edited. It needed her to go over it again. As you say, there may have been things that she won. I mean, the battle's not even on stage. People die off stage. I mean, I really like the series, but I think that book 7 just is not up to snuff, and I think it's because they rushed her. They would have done much better to actually edit her rather than just let her slide, and to actually take time with it.
Well, you reach a certain point, and I think with Rowling, this happened around book 4 specifically, where you get so big they become afraid to edit you.
I think that's true, but I still think that they could have said, why don't you go over this again, and given her more time, because she kind of indicated at the time that she was rushed, and even at the time I was like, why rush her? It's not like the audience isn't going to pay for the book if you take more time to do it better. You know what I mean?
It was such a different time, too. Like, a lot of people just don't realize this. J.K. Rowling, and this was even for me, she was at the top of the world. In many ways, she was like my idol. Like, I wrote letters to her. Like, she was everybody's idol. She was doing interviews with fans. She was doing, right? Like,
everybody loved her until she rightfully stood up for the fact that men are not women.
Well, I turned on her once she came out and said, like, oh, well, actually, Dumbledore is gay, right?
Oh, my gosh. So
that's a betrayal. I'm not, I can't support
my church has a class called by the extremely fancy name of class. And I happened to be taking class in New York City down the road from where she made that announcement.
Yeah.
And all the week beforehand, it was a class on praying. So I was praying. And one of the things that kept coming up was something that was like a magazine that about gay life or something that kept and I kept thinking, oh, I should pray about that. But I didn't get around to it on the many things on my list to pray about until the news came out that she'd made this announcement. And I remember mentioning this to my teacher, and he said that, okay, this is totally off topic, but it's only one line, so I'm going to say it anyway. He had a similar experience with John Lennon, that he kept thinking about Lennon the week before Lennon was killed, but he hadn't really stopped and prayed about it. And he mentioned it to his teacher, and his teacher said, well, it's a lost opportunity. And I thought, I wish I'd taken the time to sit and pray. Kept coming to me to do it. But honestly, I had a lot of other things I was praying about at the time. I don't know that it would have changed anything, but it was so eerie to discover that this had happened, I think, on the same road. Like she was at Carnegie Hall and I was on the west side and that's on the east side or something. But it was on the same street, and it just was such an eerie thing. And I really thought she'd made a mistake.
I was I was very disappointed, very disgusted by it. And I was not having it with a lot of the excuses people were making. Cause I was involved. I shouldn't say this. I wasn't involved in the fan. I wasn't posting on forums or anything, but I knew about what the fandom was talking about. I read the fan sites, right? Yeah. Leaky Cauldron, MuggleNet were the two big ones.
Right. Yeah. And I
was reading them. So I was reading the essays and things that people wrote, and there are people go oh, there are hints in the book he was gay, and I'm like, that is
there's not.
Garbage.
Absolutely.
I read everything. It wasn't a hint in the back of anyone's mind.
No, I had been just wondering if there was a secret romance with McGonagall. So I definitely had not seen any of these hints.
Yeah, like people did theorize about other characters, right? Dumbledore, never,
No,
never,
they had not.
never came up. Like it's total nonsense. They're like, oh, but see, he wears a lilac suit. I said, yeah,
No,
this is an
yeah,
established joke in the series. He's a wizard. They dress
right,
weird. That's
right,
the joke.
exactly. So I had a theory about why this happened, and my theory is the following. I noticed in the 80s and 90s that lots of female fantasy writers had gay characters. It was a huge thing. Like lots of them were gay. And my theory for why was that the woman trying to write the male character doesn't really get men. So they make their characters slightly too emotional, they think of them in because they're girls, they're thinking of them in a slightly feminine way. Well, the logic of character tends to be that who's attracted to feminine qualities? Men. And I thought that this same phenomena must have been that she probably thought in her mind about the friendship between Grindelwald and Dumbledore. And she thought of him as kind of feminine because that's the way she's imagining it, you see? And so that's where I suspected that that's where it happened. That's why she came around to this. But I was disappointed, it was disappointing because it's retroactively affecting all these, people who had, including young men who had, admired Dumbledore when like you reading when you're young, and it just seemed like a really, it was a low blow. It got her a bit of attention from the same people who now hate her.
Yeah, and it's it was absurd at the time. Like it was very, very, as somebody who knew what the fan, like where the pulse was in the fandom.
Yeah.
Like if people theorize about anyone, they theorize about Malfoy, and they did it just because he was a teenage boy. Like none of it was real.
Yeah.
But like Dumbledore, there were no theories. There was no discussion of it. Nobody was there in the background like, oh, maybe he was. Like it just didn't come up.
Yeah.
Like,
it didn't come up. It was just something in her imagination when she was making him up as a young guy. And she should have just kept it to herself,
This
because
is assuming that you even think it was in her imagination, which I question.
I do think that just because I've seen how women do these things, when I look at the section between when Dumbledore was young, I can imagine that she thought there was some kind of romance there. But I don't think she put it across. I didn't pick up on it when I read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's also here's the thing though, I don't trust Rowling because it reminds me there's a YouTuber called Jenny Nicholson who was going over like the Fantastic Beasts movie that was written by Rowling, and there was a comment where they go, "Oh, Nagini is actually like a Korean performer who was trapped as a snake," and I'll never forget Jenny Nicholson saying, "Rowling claims she came up with this in 1990 or whatever," and then she goes, "You're a dirty liar, Joe." She's like, I see, and then she goes, I have to imagine, like, what was on that original napkin? Boy wants to be a wizard. Also, the snake is a Korean lady. And it's like,
well, it's certainly possible that she could have had 6 billion ideas, and one of them was, what if the snake was a person? And then she just dropped it, and later on she tried to, you know what I mean? Lots and lots of ideas can go through the mind of an author, and then she picks it up again. But there's no indication in the book that she had anything like that in mind, and certainly not when like Neville kills the snake or whatever. You know what I mean? It makes it uncomfortable in retrospect.
Yeah, it's like, wait, so Neville just murdered that woman. She was
right.
No, she was an enemy combatant, but yes, Neville did kill a woman.
Yeah, he didn't murder her, but it still makes it much less pleasant than the rather dramatic, heroic Neville killing a snake.
Everyone stops. Whoa, Neville! That was a woman. What are you doing? But it was a snake. She was a snake.
The snake transforms after he kills her, and it's like, whoa, that was a person all along.
Yeah.
The decapitated head whispers, "I had a tragic."
She turns back into a girl. Oh my gosh, that'd be awful.
It would
But
be very
on the
funny.
original subject of dialogue, I do think the dialogue in Harry Potter is really well done. And it's very
Yes, yes.
colorful, both the dialogue itself and in the dialogue tags and stuff. It's colorful in the way that children's books are colorful. That nowadays there's all sorts of style things that say, don't use adverbs. Well, I'm sorry, there's times when it's just appropriate. And kids' books, where you're trying to get colorful, dramatic, fun quickly, is just the kind of place that kind of writing should be used. But I don't think you would do well reading Harry Potter and just reading the dialogue.
No.
A lot of the world building, I mean, the good part of the world building, the mood, the delight of the magical place she set up and all these other things, a lot of that's not in the dialogue. If you were just reading the dialogue, you'd be missing a great deal of what makes Harry Potter worth reading.
Yeah, it's it's an absurd piece of reading advice. But even besides that, like one of the things too, like that just reminded me of something where like it's just amazing how these criticisms of Rowling became so forced. I remember, I forget the exact context of it, but I mentioned that Rowling, and this was in passing, it was literally just talking about like strengths of certain writers. And I said, Rowling is very good at writing characters. Her characters are all very well done, very distinct,
Yes.
she is an excellent character writer. And
I
people were
agree.
clowning on me for this. And I'm like, I'm actually
No.
shocked people are
Yeah.
clowning on me for this, because this used to be like a standard thing you would say about Rowling, is
You're
that
absolutely
she's
right.
bad at other things, but she's good at character. Like that's a strength of hers. And people were just like, because she was, undermentioned, right? She was, scum. So you couldn't admit that she was genuinely good at something.
Right. But she is. She's actually really good at character. She has a very colorful, dramatic style, and the characters are very engaging. A lot of her characters are likable. Even some of the bad guys are likable. Some of them aren't, but they aren't meant to be. But some of them are, and she does them really well. And I think that one should give credit for where things are done right. You can say, I don't like her writing, or it doesn't quite make sense from the beginning to the end, or it's not my style, but I don't think you can say she doesn't do good characters. That's just
Right.
silly.
Her characters are very memorable. They're very distinct. They have their own voices. Like you can never, you wouldn't mistake them. They behave in interesting, realistic, consistent ways. Like this is all like character writing 101, but Rowling's good at it,
Yep. I agree. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely spot on
Now,
with that.
what I was
I just
mentioning,
had an idea about this dialogue thing. So imagine for a moment that you're not reading every book out there. You're only reading Court of Thorns and Roses clone books. So they're all books that take place in a world where there are, immortal elf lords who are kind of evil, who are mistreating the main character. It may be the reason they're not reading much description and they're only reading the dialogue is that they're reading a set of books in almost the same background. In which case, they may not care that much about the background. They might just want to see how the hero and the heroine interact. But that's not advice for reading good books. Sorry. It's advice just if you're trying to read a whole bunch of stuff in the same semi-genre, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
yeah, I think there's something to that. And it's also like, what's your idea of good dialogue as well? It's like one of the things that came up recently is I was having a conversation with Kursova, actually, the magazine, who's great, Alex. We had a disagreement because I was saying that I think Andy Weir is a good writer, right? Pretty uncontroversial take, but he doesn't, his dialogue, they were calling it like Reddit chungus. And what this means, it was very ironic, very millennial coded, right? He would use a lot of like, well, that just happened and that sort of thing. And I was saying, I'm like, I agree with you that his dialogue in Project Hail Mary, especially where the quotes were from, I actually thought was fine in The Martian. I had no issue with it, but in like Project Hail Mary, from the clips, the little bits of it I've seen, is not great, right? But I still think he's a very good writer because that's one aspect of writing. What he's good at is creating very compelling sci-fi scenarios with high stakes, with characters who you want to see succeed, who have to get through difficult scenarios in order to do it, right? Like, and even though he's bad at this one aspect, it's like, I think if you're going to dismiss Andy Weir as a result of it, you're missing the forest for the trees, right?
And I mean, I have not read his books, but I would suspect, I would think that before you said whether you thought he was a good or bad, you'd have to find out if that was what he was trying to do. In other words, if every book he read had that kind of dialogue and it was, you know, a little overly modern or whatever, you know, then you could definitely say, you know, this guy is not that great at dialogue. It's just kind of, you know, but if it turned out another book he wrote, the dialogue was entirely different and he had deliberately been trying to get that mood, then in fact, his dialogue writing would be good. It would be a style that some people don't like. So, you know, I'm not sure that one could state for sure one way or the other about such a thing unless you compared books and found out that he continued to do that, as opposed to he decided for this book that that's how he was going to do the dialogue, if you understand what I'm saying.
That's true. I've been making an effort recently to read the classics and it was actually after a conversation with Jeffro Johnson, the writer of Appendix N.
Yeah.
Minute rant at the end of it where he's like, don't read anything before 1980. I just read Aeschylus. Prometheus Unbound is great. We need to read it.
Yes.
It actually stuck with me enough that I'm like, you know, I've read Homer, I've read Shakespeare, I've read some Dickens, right? But I need to, like, I've been avoiding some books because they just seem like too difficult or too boring, and that's just not a good reason. I should read the classics. So I read Crime and Punishment, which was great, by the way. Right, I started War and Peace recently, and
I love War and Peace. So Joss really liked Crime and Punishment. I think I've only read Brothers Karamazov, which did not make a big impression on me. But War and Peace is one of my absolute favorite books. Now I noticed
I just started it. I found it more readable than Crime and Punishment, which is very claustrophobic.
Most people seem to prefer one or the other. I mean, there are people who just love the Russian authors, but I've noticed a lot of people prefer either Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. I will say that War and Peace, the first like 40 pages is not a great idea of what the book is going to be like. That his characters are really, both John and I, when we read it, felt it was like we felt like we knew these people. They were like more real than our friends. But it takes a while. It takes a little while to get into it. It's a little boring at first.
From what I have noticed with Tolstoy versus Dostoevsky is that Tolstoy has a little bit, and this is very early pickings. I don't even know what percentage I'm in, probably like less than 10 at this point. You know, it's a 1,200 page book.
Yeah.
Pierre, let me put it this way. I know from like cultural osmosis that Pierre is going to get a bunch of money. He hasn't gotten it yet. So
yeah. If you have, if you're not yet at the point where Pierre has, then you're in the really early part.
Right.
I think it really starts coming alive once Pierre and Andre, the best scenes in the book, other than Natasha scenes, are the ones where Pierre and Andre are on stage together. And you won't get to that for a while. So I definitely urge you to keep reading. The wonderful parts of it haven't come on stage yet.
But I would say in the early goings, the one of the big differences I would say between Tolstoy and Dostoevsky that I've noticed, and this is entirely a stylistic difference. It is not a difference in craft or ability or anything.
Right.
That's how they do it. Is that Tolstoy's authorial voice is a little bit stronger, at least in War and Peace versus Crime and Punishment, because Crime and Punishment is very much, you are deep into Raskolnikov, the main character's head.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It is hyper focused on everything he is thinking, and sometimes he switches point of view characters. So whoever the point of view character is,
yeah,
like,
and you're absolutely correct. The War and Peace is very much a written in third person omniscient.
Yes,
he really does. part of what he does so well is like you'll have a scene where he'll just give you in one paragraph 3 or 4 people's impressions of things. You know what I mean? And so it's a totally
Exactly.
different style. And I there's no reason you can't, enjoy both of their books perfectly well. But his is more, to me, it's more, I don't know, positive. It's more, I don't know.
There's a line in War and Peace, a throwaway line that just struck me because I had just finished Crime and Punishment, as Dostoevsky would not have done this. And it's when Pierre he has a conversation with Prince Andrew, who, by the way, might be Andre in some translations.
Yes. Andrew is Andre.
Okay. So he has a conversation with the prince, and the prince says, "Don't go and meet with your like dissolute loser friends," right?
Right. Yeah.
And Pierre goes and meets with them, right?
Yes.
And Tolstoy just very casually says, "As men of weak character will sometimes do, he made excuses." And I'm like, this is kind of shocking because Tolstoy, the author, has come in and explicitly told us Pierre is a man of weak character, right? And I'm like, I don't think Dostoevsky would have told me that.
No, he would have done it very differently, but Pierre's weak character doesn't stop him from being a really wonderful character. Do you know what I mean? I think Tolstoy is correct. The type of weakness is the type of weakness that you definitely see in some young men. You know what I mean? But yes, Tolstoy is much more of a, like, he's observing from a distance and telling you what people's
Tolstoy
the world is
more,
and so that's quite different, but he does it really, really well.
But I bring all of this up to say that sometimes I have conversations even with other authors, even with authors I respect, who I'm not going to name by name, but I've brought up on the show before. Ben knows exactly who I'm talking about. Like that they will say that some sort of classic work of literature is bad, and their argument for it is we were forced to read it in school and it was boring. And I've never been in, like, I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong, because I don't assume that things you need to read. Like I read a book called A Separate Peace in school. Horrendous book.
I read that too, yeah.
But like, so I don't assume that it's necessarily good, but I also don't assume it's bad. And I find the argument it's boring to be vacuous. I don't think that that's really
I agree with you, because I knew a girl who didn't like Tolkien because she had to read it in school.
Right.
And I think what happens is that in school, often they don't read the whole thing. They jump around a bit, which means you might be missing part of what makes it good. And B, sometimes the kids are just they're not quite ready for it, Like, I've read War and Peace a number of different times in my life, and my reaction to it has been quite different based on what was going on with my life at the time. Like what things I got out of it, and I'm just using this as an example because it happens to be one I've read more than once. Both I wrote a essay, my senior essay on it, and Orville wrote his senior essay on it. When Orville read it, we actually just listened to it together for most of it. So I actually reread it recently. But I think that it's very likely that sometimes the things that people are presented and they have to read, the moment they say they didn't like something because they had to read it, you almost can kind of just not count what they say. It doesn't 100%, because as you say, there are some books that were just kind of bad and that we were forced to read them and they weren't really that great. But I think that when people are forced to read things, they often don't get out of it what's really good in it.
Yeah,
for
part
whatever
of the
reason.
problem though is
They're rushing. They only have to read part of it. They're just frustrated because they have to do it, so they don't really engage.
Part of my issue is the specific criticism. It was boring, because to me, like, I had a discussion with someone who actually, I said this about a book and they like called me out for it, and then I took it to heart. I'm like, you know what? You're right. Like, it's not a good criticism. All that really says is, I, for some reason, did not find this book interesting.
Right.
It does not actually say anything about why the book itself might be flawed,
might be good or bad.
like it.
What it really says is,
serious authors go like, The Great Gatsby is not good. Why? Because it's really boring and the characters are unlikable. Well, to be honest, I don't think that either of those things are you might be right that The Great Gatsby isn't good for a variety of reasons, but not for those two. Those are not good reasons for why it's not a good book.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to talk about what's wrong with Gatsby, you'd want to talk about the morality or the purpose of it and things like that, you know. And I think you're right that a lot of times when someone had to read something, they never properly engaged with it, you know, and they're not telling you the qualities of a person who's really read the thing and has an opinion about it. They're telling you the qualities of a person who's annoyed and doesn't want to have to do something. You know what I'm saying? So I definitely agree with that. Yeah. But I think it's great that you're trying to read the classics. It's really useful to know these things. I think it brings a depth to our writing where if you've read them and you've thought about them, it's not an active depth like I'm going to bring these ideas and put them in my book. It's more of it penetrates your thinking, and some of the ideas and the important parts then come into what you're doing without you having to be pretentious about it. You know, it's just you've now thought about these, you know, the things that other great writers have thought about. So, you know, you have that as the grist for your mill, you know?
Well, exactly. It's like I want to improve as a writer, right? Like I started to think about this more seriously because my first novel is coming out next year. So right now, the current classic that I am reading is Le Mort d'Arthur, right? And the
Cool.
reason I told Ben, this is literally like I'm summarizing almost the exact words I said to him, which was if somebody else were to dare to write an Arthurian novel and then admit they hadn't read the Le Mort d'Arthur, I would make fun of them.
Yes.
And I can't. I'm like, before the editing rounds come through, and they're gonna start in a couple months. They're gonna start bringing me rounds of editing. I have to force myself through the.
You absolutely do. Just make sure that there's, you know, not things that you wish you had touched on there.
Exactly. So, and also just to be like, you can't claim to be a fan of the Arthurian tradition and not have read the d'Arthur, and then you're a poser, right?
I think you're right. It's very similar to how it would be shocked how late in the process of writing the Prospero books I went back and reread The Tempest.
Oh, good. I feel better.
I had seen a few. I mean, it's not like I was unfamiliar with it, but it was, you know, I didn't actually go back and re-immerse myself in it, and it was early enough in the process that I was able to you know, add and tweak some things. But it was kind of amusing to me that I hadn't done it earlier. You know, I really should have done it right at the beginning.
The book comes out next year because it's a small press. They don't have a lot of editors. They have other books coming first. So the rounds of editing, like from
so you have the time. But I think you're doing exactly the right thing. You do exactly the right thing.
But I have to read it,
right? Because you kind of just need to. You need to have the database of information within you, if you know what I mean by that. Even if not much, you know, even if not much changes, at least you'll know you were or were not in step with this, and you can decide about it, you know? Hey.
Right. And there's definitely interesting things that Mallory is doing in the Le Mort d'Arthur. Like I had tried to read a few times, and every time it's written in this newsman-like style, where it's just like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then my eyes glaze over, and I go like, this should be objectively incredibly interesting, and you are describing it in about as boring a way as it could possibly even theoretically be described. And yet, as I'm trying to immerse myself more in the book, I'm starting to realize that he's doing like very interesting. Like Ben and I had a discussion this morning. I got through Sir Balin and the Dolorous Stroke. Right now, I had heard of the Dolorous Stroke. I knew the story. I had never actually read it myself. I just heard it. In fact, I heard Malcolm White talking about it recently on an interview in Pints with Aquinas. And of course, I knew that Galahad finds the Grail and restores the wasteland. But I read the story of Sir Balin and go, this is so fascinating the way he's being presented. Like, there's a lot of really interesting things going on. Like, he's simultaneously, like, almost line to line, being complimented as a great knight, and then doing something that makes everybody angry at him. he's almost like a proto Lancelot in that way, like one of the greatest knights, but also a horrendous sinner who makes all these mistakes and does these terrible things. And I mentioned it to Ben, and Ben goes, "Yeah, actually, Ben, you can say yourself if you'd like. You're actually here. Go ahead, Ben."
Oh my goodness. Oh, yeah, no, I can't remember what I said.
Oh
Well,
no,
take a moment to think of it, and let me say really quickly, and then I'll let you go back.
it's in the
I
Discord.
just listened to the Malcolm Dwight interview on Pints for Aquinas, and I must say I'm really interested. His poetry version of Gawain and the Grail sounded fascinating. I am not
I bought
normally.
it. I bought it and started reading it. It's beautiful. It's fantastic.
I promised John I'd get him a copy for Father's Day.
Yeah,
anyway,
it's fantastic. But
so Ben,
yeah, Sir Balin, like he's this very strange character who is simultaneously like he'll do something, he'll always have a good, and I mentioned it to Ben, it's like what's interesting about him too is that every individual thing that happens to him he can explain. Like, for example, he kills the Lady of the Lake, straight up beheads her in court. And then Arthur is extremely mad at him. He goes, "No, you don't understand. You really, really like she's a horrible woman. I forget exactly what she did, but she did something to my family. Like she had to die." And Arthur basically goes like, "Get out. I'm just really, really angry with you right now." So he leaves. He gets into a fight with a knight. He kills the knight. And then he goes like, "Hey, man, I didn't want to kill." And everybody's like, "Why'd you kill him? He was such a good knight." And he's like, "I didn't want to kill him. He was a good guy. Like, like, but look, he attacked me. I had no choice. I had to kill him." It's like, "Yeah, but now you killed this great knight." And then somebody else in front of him kills himself while he's there. Because, like, I think he accidentally kills a woman who throws herself in front of the knight. And then he kills himself. And he's like, "No, it was an accident." He goes, "Well, why didn't you stop him from killing yourself?" "Oh, well, you couldn't. I couldn't. He moved too quick." And go, okay, every individual thing he has an excuse for. And then you look at the accumulated weight of it. And then you go like, starting to look a little suspicious, Sir Balin.
Yeah.
And then he gets to the castle. And even in the castle, every individual event that occurs, he can explain with some plausible excuse, right? Well, I didn't want to wound the Fisher King. Oh no, Jagi disconnected. Ben, entertain us. Quick.
Yeah, no, Balin is. I didn't really pick up all that stuff just because there's a certain amount of failure to these characters that are not to be underestimated. Balin is a fantastic example of a character who's sort of like, how do I want to put it? Like his example translates across all the knights going forward.
I get what you're.
Welcome back, Jagi.
Hi.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
Nope, no problem. Yeah, Ben found his point. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so Balin acts as an example of all the knights going forward. While there are fights before and fights after, and then there's the pre-Arthurian tales about his father and Merlin and all this other stuff. Balin is the format that all the knights flow through. Either they're better than Balin or they're worse than Balin morally in what they do and so on and so forth. Balin has excuses because Balin is a personal failure in many ways, but also it's normal and natural for these knights to have excuses. They're not really good men in and of themselves. They are, warriors who are stuck within their paradigm, but with Arthur, they now have a choice to be better than what they are. But you have
That's
Balin,
a really good way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yep. It's like there's a lot of like Christ parallels between Arthur and and Jesus Christ. But the Christ parallels between Christ and Arthur, yes. But there's a salvation to working for Arthur that you do see throughout the Morte d'Arthur. King Mark is evil and pathetic and all this jazz. But Tristan, who does not really serve Arthur in the same way, is kind of like this morally neutral character. And then you have Lancelot, who is, not a great guy, but frankly, out on the road, he's actually, fairly good. His
Yeah.
sin is Guinevere, not like randomly oppressing the peasantry.
Right,
Um,
right.
and then you have Galahad as the truly good person. It's the choices that these people make. Like my theory, my joke is that Mordred, who eventually will be driven in a tournament, probably the only important thing to happen in one of those tournaments, is driven into the ground headfirst like a stake. He is certainly brain dead. And if he were anything less than a knight of the realm, even if he's one of the weaker ones, he would be dead. Uh, you know, uh, the thing that people say is that actually Mordred was evil because of the hyper traumatic brain injury of being being driven into the ground like a stake by Lancelot. No,
It's
he
possible.
was always a jerk. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Hey, when I was in the
Fine.
when I was in England in October, I got to go
Yep.
to Dozmary Pool, which is the spot where Bedivere threw the sword back into the to give it to the Lady of the Lake after Arthur dies.
That's
And
really cool.
yeah, it was really cool. So we had to go. It was like up a hill in one of these tiny one-lane roads that have huge what does it call it on either side? You can't see on either side because the hedges on either
Embankment.
side.
Yeah.
And my poor friend who was driving was, and then we had to pass a bicycle, and she's like, if a car comes the other way, this is the end of us. But it was worth it. We went all the way up, and we got pictures of the whole, kind of in the middle of nowhere with little snakes next to it, and it plays a part some things in the Roanoke background. Both there's a scene there in the book, 200 years before Rachel Day, but it also will appear in a later book that is in too. But anyway, so it was really neat to be there. And both this is this famous place from Arthur, and also described to my friend an important event that will happen there later in my books. And so it was a really neat thing, which, I mean, I went there, and I also got to go to Glastonbury where Arthur is supposedly buried. So that was two rather cool things I got to do on my trip that were Arthurian.
So I do Pinkerton's Ghosts, and some of my stories are set in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, right? Which is, a lot of people don't know this. It's a fascinating thing. In the center of New Jersey is this massive, almost unpopulated forest. Which, by the way, like the state's so weird because we are the most densely populated state in the country because we have multiple big cities with people packed like sardines. And yet, despite this, in the middle of the state, there is this forest where it's like one person per square mile for miles and miles. Okay, so the Jersey Pine Barrens are known for having a lot of weird supernatural things. Well, in the very first Pinkerton's Ghost story, I based the setting on very, very loosely. I shouldn't even say based the setting. The setting was inspired very, very loosely by a place called Batstow Village in the Pine Barrens. Batstow Village is like it's a ghost town that was then turned into a kind of living historical museum, right?
Cool.
Where was like a former Pine Barrens town that they cleared out, and now they sort of run it as a museum. Well, on my way, we drove down to the shore of New Jersey. You have to go through the Pine Barrens. So on the way back, we stopped at Batstow Village, which was very cool. And I got to see it. But this is the really weird thing that I learned. I named my town in the story Harrisville. And for no reason, like absolutely no reason, literally because it sounded like a generic town name, right? I could have picked anything. I learned later that there is, in fact, and I could have possibly imbibed this, like, secondhand or something, but I don't think I did. I learned later that there is, in fact, a ghost town in the New Jersey Pine Barrens called Harrisville.
Oh,
And
cool.
in my story, they were former factory, like it was a former factory town that then the factory shut down, which is the story there. That is the story of the real New Jersey
Wow.
ghost town of Harrisville. It was a
That
former factory town that closed down. I found this out and I'm like, there's like, that's pretty cool. Also kind of creepy.
that is cool.
And I
That
knew that
is
it
cool.
wasn't that because I even knew the actual town I based it on because I visited it, right? It was
Yeah,
Basto.
yeah.
So I'm like, it wasn't based on apparently.
That is cool. I've had things along those lines happen, but that's just cool. It's always cool when something like that happens. The whole point of my trip to Scotland and England was to visit places that are appearing in novels I'm writing. And the last day, the last evening, I went to where Rachel Griffin's sister Sandra lives, a place that appears in book 3. And I ate at the Cat and Mutton, which is a real restaurant that they eat at in the book. But the one the moment when I saw the building that was her sister lives in, which is a real building, that I'd gotten pictures of, there's nothing that it compares with. Like that. I don't mean that nothing's better or worse. I just mean there's almost no other thing that's like that moment when you've studied something for a long time and you get to see it. But the interesting thing was that there's a road that goes from the Cat and Mutton to the canal, and then Sandra's building's on the other side of the canal. And what I didn't know until I got there is that this entire road is lined with New Age stores. It's all New Age stuff, and I was like, this has to be a road of the wise that's just doing magic stuff and pretending to be New Agey in order to hide from the mundane unwaries. It was about as close and in a real. Now the New Age stuff is kind of creepy, but it was still interesting. It was really neat to see it. But yeah, that's really neat though coming upon it and finding that your name was there and it was practically real. That's just cool. That's just cool.
Yeah, so it's neat. Part of my project with my Pinkerton's Ghost Stories was I was kind of trying to show off New Jersey a little bit because I have maintained for a while that New Jersey is a state that is underappreciated. It literally has a little bit of everything all crammed into a very small area. We have massive forests. We actually have a bit of the Appalachian Mountains in the north of the state.
Yeah,
we have
yeah,
our
we
shores.
used to go
we have
hiking
farms,
there when I was a kid. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When I was a kid, we were part like the Appalachian Mountain Club and Sierra Club and things like that would do hikes. And one of the places that we went was in New Jersey. I'm trying to remember the name of the place where the Appalachian Trails in New Jersey.
High Point State Park, maybe? High Point.
It wasn't necessary.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Yeah, the state has a little bit of everything, and I tried to show that off by having, especially in the first season, I made a point of having my character travel to all the different parts of New Jersey and setting things in different locations. But yeah, the other thing I did want to mention 2 other things before we go. First was because I got interrupted earlier, literally cut off, How Not to Write a Novel. I highly recommend this book. It's so funny. One of the funniest books I've ever read and genuinely good advice. So Newman and Middlemark, to my knowledge, are editors. So what they're saying, it's 200 classic mistakes and how to avoid them. And they are saying like these are the sorts of mistakes that we get all the time that lead us to rejecting our novels. And each mistake, they have a little example paragraph that they write that is just hysterically funny. Like one of the mistakes was like, but he loved his mother. And it was like, and when in which you make this is like an example of it. And we go, in which you make the villain, you give the villain one redeeming quality, and then assume that you've made him nuanced. And then it was like Slappy grabbed the 3 new orphans that he was going to shove into the dungeon. It's like now he could get them hooked on heroin so they could start turning tricks for him. And it's like, and then he looked at the picture of his ma and his face softened. Ah, Ma, if only you hadn't gone and died, things might be different. And then they're like, yeah, so this doesn't work. Like, and one of the mistakes that they note is like the self-insert character. And it's like, and they mention, and one of the things they mention that's pretty interesting is they go, look, if you're going to insert yourself, they go, it's true that great authors have done it, but when they do it, there's often 2 ways that it's done. One is they make it very clear, I am a loathsome worm, and this is a story about how terrible I am. And it's like, that could work. It's like, or it's just like a travelogue, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
I think they might have had another reason.
You're in the story because you're a character, but you're not better than anybody else. You're just in the story.
Right. That's like, or, you know, you could do a story with you as a self-insert if the story is like, I am a loathsome worm. This is a story about how terrible I am, right? And it's like, okay, fair enough. And then they have an example, you know, all of the examples in the book are hysterical. This is, and even the, I'm just looking at their little blurb at the front. It says, what do you think of my fiction book writing? The aspiring novelist extorted. Darn, the editor hectored in turn. I cannot publish your novel. It is full of what we in the business call really awful writing. But how shall I absolve this dilemma? I have already read every tome available on how to write well and get published. The writer tossed his head about wildly. It might help, opined the blonde editor helpfully, to ponder how not to write a novel so you might avoid the very thing. And that's the premise of the book.
That's great. That's a great premise.
I highly recommend it. It's extremely, even if you don't get anything out of it, which, you know, you might not, but like, it's extremely
and there was a time when I read a lot of like how to write books, and I found out most of them were useless. But I've always really enjoyed the good ones, and I can tell you a little bit about the difference between them, in my personal opinion. Most how to write books fell into the category of the two categories. The first was, this is how I write, but I don't have experience dealing with other writers, so I don't understand the difference between how I do it and how writers in general do it. And the other category, which is usually quite enjoyable, is I've taught writing, or I'm an editor, or I'm an agent, and I've seen lots of writers, and here's advice on how to write that applies across the board. So I'm not going to be saying, yes, you have to write outlines or never write outlines. I'm going to have the wisdom to say both of these will produce good books. And in my experience, the guys who wrote good, worthwhile writing books were people who had experience teaching writing or editing or as agents. And authors, while might enjoy their book about their writing, often they're just not as useful because they don't have a sense of what works for everybody versus what works for them.
I could say personally, like you can read as much as you want, but it's like you know, if you read a sell guide, oh yeah, Star Wars books are always successful. Yeah, that might have been true 10 years ago. You know, or this is how you do this, or this is how you do that. Well, okay, but you read people who you know, like what the old masters, and they break the rules all the time. So you get stuck in this infinite loop of what's the actual advice. You know, the advice I give people is generally, yeah, you just have to write.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yep.
Get your million words out.
Read it, see how it works. You know, and I think that a lot of getting better does come just from writing. And I think, going back to the earlier topic on fanfic, I think the reason that Second Stories thing on the dangers of fanfic really resonated with me is if you write ordinarily trying to write entertaining stuff in your own stories, you're going to likely to get better. Not everybody will get better, or not at the same rate, but if you're going to keep trying, you want to learn, you're probably going to get better. But if you're writing fanfic of the kind where you're doing wish fulfillment and your point is some kind of a political or emotional point about what you're doing, not for the purpose of good storytelling, you actually get worse. And that's a horrible thing. It's really a horrible thing, because there could be people out there, they write fanfic, they get praised for it, they keep doing it, they have no idea they're damaging their ability to tell a good story. They might be popular or delight people in the group of people who like this kind of fanfic, but they're not going to write something, they're likely not to be able to write something that's really going to work that well outside of it. Now, I mean, and somebody could say, well, there are some famous Harry Potter fanfics. Well, yes, but in many of those cases, they were not quite as wish fulfillment. They were doing other things too. That's why people like them. You know what I mean? So it's not like everybody who's writing in someone else's background is making these mistakes. But like when I look at some of the Pride and Prejudice, I couldn't read more than a little bit of them, but some of the Pride and Prejudice fanfic, they damage the premise of the character in some way that makes it so that if you were not a Pride and Prejudice fanfic fan, you wouldn't enjoy the thing. And at that point, if you're learning to do that, yeah, you're pleasing the small audience, but you're actually interfering with your ability to please a larger audience.
Yep. Yeah,
it's a good way to look at it. Like, what does your audience expect? Well, a horror audience expects, a certain amount of blood and guts and tension and screwed up situations.
Right.
Like with Obsession, which is probably going to be the best horror movie of the year so far. Certainly, it's just a fantastic story about a guy making a wish to have the girl he wants, and it goes wrong. And this flavor is demonic possession. Like you might be like, oh, I don't. Well, no, it's fundamentally just done well. It has everything you want. It has messed up scenes. It has a certain amount of body horror, especially to the end, and it has parts of it that are just viscerally disturbing, where you have scenes where like the argument in the restaurant between the loving couple, but it's made disturbing because she's suddenly shouting, she's saying no way too many times, she's freaking out that she was caught in what's really just a minor lie, and then you have the cowardice of the main character. You have all these great interactions that would have been good in a typical romance, but also are very good in a horror film about a wish forcing a personality, well, a demon, on a young woman at the behest of her would-be lover, who is not like even that creepy. He's just kind of like a weak dude.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on what the important part for this particular conversation, not in general, when you listed certain things that a horror audience would like, and if it's a story is meeting the desire of an audience, who legitimately, likes this type of story, that's the kind of story that's going to do well. But I think that's very different from just, I don't know, that I'm in this Facebook group for Pride and Prejudice fan fiction. I kind of got in by mistake thinking it was something else. And there was somebody who was asking, can you tell me the names of P&P fanfic? And I forget what they were looking for, adventure or whatever it was. And I had to stop myself from writing. Why don't you just go read another book? Why don't you go pick up a book set in the same time period that has the qualities you want, whatever it was, the kind of thing you could find in a Regency romance without any trouble, And like, why do you have to damage Jane Austen's characters rather than go pick up a story that has exactly what you're asking for, but they don't have those names, I don't know. I don't get it, but, well. I know I have friends, there's something they're getting out of it, but it seems strange to me. I don't get it.
I mean, part of what they're getting at is instant and automatic cash, right? Like they immediately get people who are going to take them at least somewhat seriously because, I like Pride and Prejudice, style fiction.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. And I mean, having played in, let's say, role-playing games that had multiple branches where you could go and interact with the same people at the same time from a different point of view, I understand that, seeing the alternate versions of something you like can be really interesting, but it's just, I don't know. It's just, it's just strange to live in a world where a certain percentage of all that, I know people that fanfic is like all they read. So they're reading the like, they're not picking up anything new, therefore not starting off any new, stories and fandoms and stuff like that. I don't know, the whole phenomena is a little odd.
It is. It's I think Hillary Lane hits on it. I think she's absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's a very it's very insular and disturbing.
I will say one other thing about it that I find interesting. When I was young, and John has talked about this too, when you finished reading a book and you wanted something similar, you would go, and then there was like additional authors that were related types of stories that you would go read. John used to joke, when you finished, I forget who they were, some of the early writers, you'd go read the Lynn Carter version of the same kind of story. And a lot of us are writing things that are close enough to, Harry Potter, or close enough to Star Wars, or close enough to, whatever, that during that period, those types of things might have gotten picked up and become more popular just because somebody might go, I just finished a magic school book. I think I want to read a different magic school book because I'm really in the magic school mood. And they would go pick up another author. And there's at least 100. I mean, I keep a list of magic school books. There's at least 100 of them. You know what I mean? There's quite a few series out there. But nowadays, what happens is when somebody finishes reading or watching a movie they like, they go read fanfic about that. So the effect that used to happen where, there'd be a work and then other related things would be written, and then some of them would become popular for a time if they were done at all well. It just doesn't happen anymore because people are not stuck going, gee, I finished this and I want to read something else, so I'm going to go read another author and, have to take the little effort of getting into the new world, but maybe I'm going to find out I really like it. They just go read fanfic about the world that they already read. And I think there's a detriment there to the whole reading public in a way, if you understand what I mean.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
I'm not like, fanfic. Yeah.
Sorry, it destroys a certain amount of connection with the product. Like I found myself when I was younger, I had a habit of watching a piece of media and then reading TV tropes about it.
Yeah.
It was good in one way because it started to train me how to think of structuring stories, even very difficult ones. How do you do this? How do you do that? But what it also did was it flattened the medium, so that it was no longer, Avatar: The Last Airbender, stories. It was like, oh, Sokka's the heavy, and or the big guy, and Aang's the leader, and Katara's the lancer, so on and so forth. And it changed how I thought about stories, how I used language about stories. And
You
so
are
if you're
okay.
no, go for it.
I was just saying you are putting into words exactly why I used to really, really hate TV trips. Like when I first heard about it, I thought it was the worst possible thing. And nowadays I've seen some good uses of it too. Like
Mhm.
someone was using the TV tropes about my book when they were reading it just to remember who the characters were because they hadn't noticed that there was in fact a list of characters in the back of the book. But I didn't like it because I thought it's trivializing things that are not trivial.
Mm.
The reason stories happen in a certain way is because of the landscape of the imagination and what's satisfying. The
That's right.
reason that it's more satisfying if a poor boy saves a princess than it's a merchant's daughter. And it's more satisfying if the goose girl ends up having a prince fall in love with her than the merchant's daughter because there's more contrast. Well, when you
Mm.
take that and you merely start calling it, pulling out the tropes as if they're independent Legos that can just be stuck together, you you damage the selling process. And you see that in the movie in Milana, where there are little bits where they had to stop and like deal with they like almost talk to the viewer dealing with the different tropes or complaints that they've had because if they went online and listened to people talking and now they had to respond to it and it takes away from the enjoyment of the story, you know.
Yep.
So that's one of the things that I like you're saying, because now if I'm looking at Airbender and I think, oh, she's the Lancer and he's the this and that, I might not be aware that that's only one interpretation and that it's a person could sit down and analyze it a totally different way and come away with another interpretation. And it just it makes things that are organic in the story trivial because now
Yep.
that's just when the prince meets the girl or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just
Hmm.
it treats it like it's Legos that can be snapped together when really that's not what's going on.
Yeah. It it's it's exactly that. But there's a certain amount of it you have to do when you're like say plotting out a story. But quite frankly, once I realized I just write from the seat of my pants, it just kind of like goes, oh well, actually I only needed this in the sense of consuming how media is put together and until
Yeah,
it became
yeah,
natural thought. Like
right, exactly.
and even then for like the truly great stuff like we've mentioned before, the rules aren't going to be followed.
Yeah, yeah.
It's I keep trying to write present tense stories. It doesn't work. I'll do it someday. You know,
I do not like present tense at all. To me, if a story's in present tense, there's no tension
mm,
because the way stories are told, they're told in past tense. So when I read in past tense, I feel like it's actually happening. But whenever
yeah,
I read something in present tense, I feel like it's just a guy standing next to me telling me the story. It's already happened. So, okay, I'm not going to get upset about it because he's standing right here. Nothing bad could have happened. So I
right.
don't enjoy them. I know they're kind of popular nowadays, but I do not enjoy them at all. Um,
Well, it's a similar problem to uh, RPG lit RPG where it's like, are you really going to let a series of ones on your D20 kill your main character in your novel? 200 pages in? No, you're not going to do that. You're never
right.
going to kill your characters. You know, like
Yeah.
you might make that accusation to me. It's like, oh, you're going to kill your characters in Roanoke? You know, no, for
No,
several
yeah,
reasons.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Besides,
yeah.
I want to use them in stories, which is the meta thing.
Right, right,
Roanoke isn't that kind of world, you know.
right. But
I've
there's a
killed the main
difference.
character's mother in my stories,
Yeah.
you know. Like, I'm not
But I
scared.
think there's a difference between you have a pretty good idea the character's going to live and feeling like there's just no tension there. And for me, for some reason, the present tense stuff just often makes me feel like it's just flat. I don't know why.
Yeah.
By the way, most of the things on, so I have a bunch of different Substacks, but one of them's called the Art and Craft of Writing. And most of the stuff on Art and Craft of Writing is behind a paywall, while most of the stuff on my other Substacks are not. But my video on the subject, the trouble with tropes, where I talk about what we were just talking about tropes. That one is actually not behind a paywall. So if anybody wants to go watch my video on the problem with tropes and the stuff we were just talking about how the imagination works, that one is available for free. Anybody can watch it at any time.
The trouble with tropes. Be sure to look at that up, especially if you're interested in the work.
I remember that article.
Yes.
I had a lot of fun with it.
All right, we've been going for quite some time. Jagi, are there any projects we can look forward to in the immediate future, or just published?
That's a good question. Well, right now, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm one of the editors. So the writer's block, which is a space on Twitter at 1:00 on Tuesdays, which anybody is welcome to visit anytime they like. Which is sometimes we just chat, but sometimes it's on a particular topic. Is doing an anthology on the subject of relics. And right now I'm reading stories for that anthology so that we can, hopefully pick the ones that will appear in the anthology. And that it's kind of in concert with the base book sale. So the anthology will, be offered through the base book sale at some point, and a lot of the authors appearing in it are, for the most part, authors who've appeared in the base book sale or participated in some way. Other than that, I am writing the second of 2 Regency romances set in the World of the Wise that take place about 200 years before Rachel Griffin comes on scene. And they're not about ancestors of hers. One of the 4 love it, the male and female from 2 books. She's actually descended from one of them, but from a previous wife. Some earlier Griffins do appear as characters in the story. They're just not the main characters. Right. And they're a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying them. That was why I went to Scotland, was because I have my friend Erin, who has written stories that appeared in Fantastic Schools that also take place, that she's the other person other than Ben and I who write Roanoke stories. She's working on a romance about the brother of the main character from the one I'm writing right now. So she and I went to Scotland together, and we did the research together, and the Scottish part of the story we're working on together. She's the co-author on the book I'm writing now, and I have another friend who was the co-author on the previous book that I just finished. And what I'm hoping to do is get both of these books finished, and then there's a small press that I'm hoping will pick them up. If not, I'll probably just put them out myself. But I'm hoping that they're going to go together. That they take place. The main characters are different. Obviously, it's romance. You get the guy. That's the end of your romance part of the story. But most of the secondary characters, even the gentlemen who are courting the girls, because there's more than one gentleman that they meet, are the same characters. So the NPCs or the secondary characters are all of the same people, including some Griffins, and the main characters are somewhat different. One of them is a British lady, and the other is a American girl from 1800 whose family left Scotland after Culloden, after the Rising, Jacobin Rising, and because they're, lived 200 years in the world of the wise, her mother's still alive, and she was born much later. But it's kind of neat to write from that point of view of this character who's coming from rural North Carolina, America of 1809, and seeing British life in London and things like that. So that's what I'm doing right now.
That sounds like a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it, both as a fan and just for something new and interesting to read. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, Ben, you could read all the classics. What if I don't? I'm crossing my arms like a cool kid. What if
Some of the classics are really fun, though. I mean, in their defense.
But it's like I've got War and Peace, the Castalia House versions. You could kill a small dog by dropping them.
You could. It is a really long book. I mentioned I love it, but it is a really long book. But I will say that one of the fun things about the project I'm doing is I'm trying to write a romance the way you write a fantasy. What I mean by that is you write a fantasy by displaying and immersing displaying the world and immersing the reader in this fairy world. Well, that's what I'm doing here, but my fairy world is 1800s. Now, there's some magic because it's in the world of the wise. Christianity's already been erased. So there's some odd things that are not the way our world is. But I'm trying to make it so everything that's not changed because of the fantasy is historically as accurate as I can make it. So I'm presenting the past the way you present a fantasy world, which I really enjoy, and hopefully the reader will enjoy it too.
We'll look forward to them. I know Anthony has his things with the novel coming out. I am past the editing stages on some Pinkerton's Ghost stories, and I'm going in for a third total rewrite of some other stories that need to be published. I joke that I don't want to read the classics, but in reality, I am finding there's a wellspring to them that I think people underestimate. If you skip any part of these things, like it ruins a great deal of what makes these books special. You destroy a certain amount of soul in these books. What if there isn't the thing you want in them, but it's still a classic? People didn't read the classics as the classics because they were just there or whatever. They read the classics because they were truly great. Most of our American forefathers, they had a Bible, they had maybe a book of scripture and a hymnal for home worship, but they also had things like Plutarch's Lives. Maybe not as good a translation as we have today, but they certainly had them. And so the more you go down and you look at it, the more you read these books, even if they don't have something you want, it destroys your actual love of the books and the genres and the craft. But quite frankly, you minion, you peasant, you're collecting books for a, how do I want to put it? You are publishing this stuff online for good boy points to a crowd that will eat you alive the second you say that trans dogs aren't valid. That quite frankly, putting your little dog into a tutu is too far, too woke. And we can no longer allow the wokeification of society. Charlie Kirk didn't die for these dogs and tutus. You will be torn apart by the mob, justly so. It is better to disdain the plebs than it is to court their favor. And part of disdaining the plebs is reading the descriptions, you hacks. I love you very dearly. I hope you guys join us again next week. I don't really have any guests. Some of the presses that I go to for guests aren't doing anything right now. So we might just have a variety stream. But do check us out for that. The nation's 250th is coming close. Make sure that you do have something planned to celebrate the occasion. There will be other reminders past then. Thank you and good night.